And our guest today on Absolutely Famous is Western Force Super Rugby CEO Tony Lewis, and no doubt Tony will be delighted with the start of the Western Force. How are you, Tony? Great start for your boys.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it was a great start for the rugby community in WA, to be honest. I think the fans, supporters and people who love rugby needed a victory. Under Simon Cron, there's no doubt the team know what they've got to do. They know what the outcome is at the end, but they've got a purpose and they've got sort of targets they have to set to make sure they have success. So I'm sure Simon got annoyed with me half an hour about how important the victory was, but it was a victory not so much for the team but for the public in WA.
Well, it was a victory against the odds too, wasn't it? Because you didn't have the ideal build-up, losing Wallaby, Lock, Isaac Rodder, to name one, and then a couple of late withdrawals just before the start didn't help.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things Simon's done very well since he got here is not focus on an outcome, focus on making the players better. And I think he's got the confidence in that aspect that when we did lose the hookers, young Horton come on, and he's obviously played for Waratahs, he's played for Leicester. So he showed that he was one of the better hookers running around in Australia that night. In fact, if you go as far as to say he was probably the form hooker. So, look, I'm confident that Simon is not only trying to make them better players, he's trying to make sure that we've got a little bit of depth that we can cope. And there's a couple of boys in there that are only who are 19 or 20 making their debut. Sefa, the tight end prop, and George Pullman, both young boys who had just turned 20 in the Australian under-20 team last year. So all both well.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And I noted comments from your hero, Jeremy Thrush, the 37-year-old ex-All Black who came in and had a blinder. Jeremy was saying how impressed he is with Simon Cron's coaching.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, Tim Sampson was a brilliant bloke, and he's a very, very good on the grass attack coach. But I thought it was time when Tim asked us to renew his contract just to test the market and see what was out there. And what we found is we've got someone who's absolutely passionate about wanting to be the best head coach he can be. He uses the word greatness all the time. Good's not good enough. It's the enemy of greatness. And what Simon's brought to the group is an absolute passion for everyone to be better at their jobs. Not only the players, but himself, his coaching staff, his S&C. So he's a natural-born leader in the rugby sphere. And he's given the players a clear direction on what he wants to do, but more importantly, they've bought into it, they're part of the process. He's not trying to ram it down their throats, and he understands how to coach Australian rugby players. But I think that the talent's there, and I think we've managed to secure with Simon an exceptional head coach, and with guys like Jeremy bring his name up and speak glowingly about him, and they've had a lot of head coaches in their time. Bodes well for the future, but also I think we're making the right direction. And he's put a coaching team underneath him that is Jimmy Duffy, Mark Ozich, and Will Higginson, who are young, ambitious coaches who drive Simon as well. But they give him the confidence that he can trust, and I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think one thing I really like about your franchise, the Western Force, Tony, is the fact that you're developing from within, both players and obviously bringing coaches up to speed as well.
Yeah, look, there's just something, I'm not sure if many of your listeners know, but when Kieran Kane left Tasman Marco, Ken Beams, the current chairman, and myself and Wayne Young, it was sort of hell's bells, what are we going to do? And I remember saying, well, we've got Liam McDonald here, and I think he might become quite a good head coach. And it was a trust in saying, hey, let's start growing within. And then we did it once we appointed Leon. Okay, let's look at who could be the next coach. And for whatever reason went through my brain, I thought Andrew Goodman would be a really good fit in the coaching group. And he went on to be a very successful head coach, as did Clark Dermody when we brought him into our mix. So I think it's really essential that if you can grow your coaches within, because there's always a 6 to 12 month lag between when you employ someone as a new head coach and before the team gel with that person. But if they've come through with you and they know the culture of the team, they know the culture of the organisation, they know how it works, you can just move on very, very quickly and quite seamlessly.
Yeah, and of course the local population buy into it a lot easier too, don't they? You know, they can recognise the players and the coaches, probably know half of them.
Yeah, and that's the key. So one of the great things working for Andrew Forrest, he encourages empowerment, and sometimes it's hard when you have your fingers in all sorts of different things, but if you can empower, you're going to get so much more out of your staff. And Simon's empowered his coaches not only to run their coaching programs, and whether it's attack, defence, set piece, but also after the game. So last Saturday, Will, for example, went to the members area and was interviewed by the members after the game. So it just wasn't the head coach, it was one of the assistants, and they'll get to know Will, and when they're walking down the street, someone will say hello. You know, it was a great talk you gave. So I think it's a combination of selecting the right people, but also giving them the opportunity to grow to become the best coaches they possibly can.
Yeah, never underestimate the power of your supporters, that's for sure. What a wonderful story, Jeremy Thrush. 37, he comes back, answers an SOS and plays like that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So Greg Holmes and Jeremy Thrush both retired at the same time. You couldn't throw Greg Holmes into a front row now. He's probably lost about 10, 12 kgs, and he would have just buckled and died, and he would never be able to do it. But Thrushy, obviously the confident professional, doesn't need an off-season. The joke around some of the players here, he hasn't done one for 5 or 6 years anyway. But I think what he brought to the team and brought to the organisation was that we had two very young locks that started the game, and they, I think their age is 22 each, and I think what you found from that is when one of them started to tire, we had someone who could step into those shoes and throw some experience behind them, and just for 25 minutes show some direction and also be a leader. And I think he showed everything that he's got and more. And I say it to lots of people. He's a damn sight better rugby player now and has been here for 2 years, but watched him play a bit longer than he probably ever was an All Black, because he feels comfortable, he knows his body, and he's a very, very good footballer. I remember last year, Leo McDonald tried to hoodwink me into, why don't you lend us Thrushy for a year? So he's well recognised in New Zealand and the country of his birth, but in particular Australia, where he's made home and bought a house, to be one of the most experienced, well-crafted, smart second row forwards.
Of course, they bring self-belief, people like Jeremy too. He's played at the very highest level, and that often rubs off on his teammates.
Yeah, I think you saw that on Saturday when he got on there. There was a young back row on there. Tim Anstey was probably the oldest, and then in the second row. So in fact, you could probably take two of those players and add their ages together, and they'll probably average out at 41. And there's Jeremy at 37. So it's an interesting mix, you know, when you think of it like that.
Yeah, I was very impressed with your replacement halfback too, Isaac Fins-Leilawasa. He's a real spark plug, isn't he, when he comes on?
Yeah, Fonzie's a great player. Look, if I was the Australian Rugby Union, and I have a great idea, and I've got great belief that you can normally work out who's going to win when you look at the bench, and you can say, and so I looked at the bench on Friday, and I thought, shit, we've got 5 players better than those 2. And then when you add Fines into that mix, he's not only a very good halfback, but he's also a running threat. He's exceptionally fast, as fast as a winger, and I really do think he's an X-factor player. And if he was living elsewhere in the world, I think he'd be one of those guys that would definitely be playing in the national team coming off the bench. And as he gets older and more time under Simon, I think he'll become a starter. But that being said, Ian Pryor has trained the house down all year and has played very, very well and set it up really for Finesy to come off the bench and really run amok. And some people talk about, we're a long way behind at half time, but I was speaking to one of the members bars at half time, and I said, we'll score the second try after half time and we'll win, because you could see in the first half we were dominating territory, we were dominating position. It was only probably our inability to throw the pass at the right time that stopped us from scoring. Once they eliminated that, they played very, very well. And 30 points to 3, I think, was the score in the last 50 minutes. So hats off to Simon, his coaches and the team.
Yeah. So overall, what did you think of the opening round, the standard overall, with especially the Australian teams?
Look, I thought the Australian teams are pretty much where I thought they'd be. Probably a little bit surprised with the Reds. I think they're a very, very good side. But sometimes when you play the Hurricanes, and I remember playing for Otago and playing Wellington, you go out there and something would click, and Houston was doing magical stuff, and so was Bernie and Stu. Well, that was a bit like the weekend. In the first half it was pretty close, and then bang, 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 some magical stuff happened. So the Reds' score probably is not a fair reflection of the game. I think the Brumbies and the Waratahs are as close as we thought they would be. And then obviously from our game, it's a classic comment, isn't it? The game of two halves.
Sure
so
was.
Australian teams performed as I would have expected them. And when I looked at the New Zealand teams, never surprised when the Crusaders start slow. Under Todd Blacker, that used to be a consistent thing. That being said, if you look at the game closely, the Chiefs scored some outrageous tries from wide out, and that'll quickly change. I thought Scott Robinson, I actually text Razor and said, David Havili to me is the glue of your team, and Richie missed him not being its second 5'8". So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. I think David is one of the unheralded players in NZ Rugby. And I don't know what you can say about the Blues. They were breathtakingly brilliant, weren't they?
Yeah, a lot of firepower there, that's for sure.
Yeah. And there's nothing worse. I mean, I'm a Highlanders supporter, as obviously from being born down there. So not always a close eye on them, like the Crusaders and the New Zealand teams to win, but it was gut-wrenching being born and bred to Dunedin night to see 60 points scored against us, and you wouldn't find a finding human being that Clark Dermody in that mix as a head coach. So I'm sure Clark will knuckle them down and get them going. But it was an interesting scoreline there for sure.
Yeah, was it ever? Did you notice any in the match? The Western Force versus the Rebels. Did you notice the game was quicker because of the new rule interpretations to try and get more ball in play?
So one of the things I thought was a bit sad was that we didn't have the clock up on the screen. So apparently Stan aren't quite there yet, or Sky NZ. So it was hard to say if it was quicker. The ball in play was 30 minutes, so it says it wasn't incredibly quicker. I also thought the referee the scrums maybe. If I look at the New Zealand teams and the Australian teams, I think it's not the Australian teams referee for a penalty. Scrum for a penalty. I feel sometimes the referees, when they look at the scrum, they're looking for a penalty.
Yeah.
While the New referees look at it as a restart, get the ball in, get out of there and go. So I think we need to tidy up that a bit. I'd like to see the clock up for the lineouts. It didn't seem to quicken up a hell of a lot. But when you then listen to Brad Weber, and I know our players, it was 38 degrees when they were playing here too at 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Sure.
I know they felt the game was a hell of a lot quicker, but whether it's pre-season or not. So I think the rule change, I've got to clarify, because they're not rule changes, they're variations to the rules. I think they will see them really make some changes long term, but especially when that clock goes up on the screen at the station, you can imagine 20,000 Cantabrians when the Blues get to 5 seconds to go. So I think anything to make the game faster and better for the spectators is the way forward.
Yeah, for sure. Eddie Jones been appointed Wallabies coach. I'm a great fan of Eddie's. I think he's marvellous for the game, and I think he's instantly brought Australian rugby to the forefront again, just with his enthusiasm. And it was interesting to see him in Sydney when his photo was flashed up on the big screen. He got a loud cheer from the crowd.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I think if you speak to the Australian players, and I can only comment about the players that played for Australia from the Force, they loved David Rennie. They thought he did a great job. They liked the way he was developing the culture, the way he was developing depth, and it was very hard to find anyone have a criticism of him. So it was but at the same stage, once Eddie became available, it probably wasn't a shock to anyone. I really feel for Dave. I think Eddie will reap the benefits of the hard work that Dave's done. But there's no doubt in my book that the Australian rugby team needs an Australian as coach, and I think it's the way it should be. I'm always stunned when they appoint an outsider, and logically, we all know that we want to be passionate about our national sporting team, but we also want to have someone who's passionate about it. I'm not saying Dave wasn't, but Eddie certainly is OTT passionate about the team. I think he's given a whole lot of belief to young guys who maybe didn't think they were going to make the team, and now there's an opportunity. There'll be those guys who thought they were going to be in the team, maybe looking over their shoulder, so that all bodes well for the selection of the Wallabies, where they'll have a whole lot of guys trying to hit form. And I think there's nothing better than having a little agitator in the Australian sporting market. A lot of people who watch your show won't understand how dynamic the Australian sporting landscape is. Is that if you pick up a paper, AFL, rugby league are the two dominant sports, closely followed by basketball, and then there's soccer, and then we all forget that cricket runs 12 months a year, and then locked away in the back pages is rugby union. And rugby union only does well in Australia when the Wallabies are doing well, and that's been a proven case over time. So I think I'm very confident that Eddie will make a huge impact, and whether that's next 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years, it's always hard to tell in the professional sporting environment. But I can see the Australian team reaping the benefits, and I can see the super teams performing equally as well, because everyone in the teams, every player in every team knows there's an opportunity to be a Wallaby. And if you look at it, there's always one player every year that comes from nowhere to make either the All Blacks, the Wallabies, or the English rugby team.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. There's no doubt about that. And people forget that Australia have won the World Cup twice and have beaten finalists twice, so they've got a pretty good record.
Yeah, I was making that point today when we were speaking about private equity as a group of chief executives, that it's very important Australia doesn't undersell itself. New Zealand got, I think, 300 plus million for 7%, and they've got no big events coming up. In Australia, we have the Lions, the Rugby World Cup, the Commonwealth Games, and the Olympics. 4 things that New Zealand did not have when they sold, and I think at the moment Australian rugby is on the cusp of something really exciting. We've just got to work hard as a group to get our coaching structures right. Once we get those right, we'll start making sure that those young talent players don't always push off and go to rugby league when they first leave school.
Yeah, exciting times, all right. Well, you've got a tough ask in Melbourne. I love the concept of the Super Round, and you play the Reds there, so they'll be smarting from their first round loss to the Hurricanes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought process. Sorry, something just jumped on my screen. I know Simon and the coaches don't want to talk about wins. They want to talk about getting their processes right, making sure the players are doing all their one percenters, and leave the outcome to look after itself. So I'm getting my head around to trust, have absolute trust in the head coach that I've appointed, and believe in him, and know that he's going to be exceptional. Last week was probably a little bit different because I knew the rugby community needed a win, and when I went for a walk around the stand at the end of the game, you could hear everyone walking up saying how good was that, and even old Force members for the last 15, 16 years were over the moon. So from my perspective, a really top-class performance down in Melbourne, that Simon will drive will be the way to go. and the result will look after itself. And in a perfect world, we're sitting here next week feeling pretty happy with ourselves. But if we concentrate on our own individual stuff that we've got to do, and then I'm sure the result will look after itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tony, thanks very much for being on the show. Love talking rugby with you, and love what you're doing over there with the Western Force. And we're certainly cheering them as our Australian team on Absolutely Famous.
It's brilliant. I love your support.
Good on you. Thanks, Tony. Cheers.
Yeah, John.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, Tony.